And now from RTE News and Current Affairs, World Report.
Good morning and welcome to World Report with me, Colm O'Mungai. Coming up on this morning's programme, the curse of Angela, the strange fate of German minority coalition partners, a social media crackdown targets dissenters in China, and the effort to reinvigorate the independence movement in Scotland. But first this morning, Kenya is still coming to terms with the attack on a Nairobi shopping centre last week by Somali Islamist militants. James Reinl has been looking back at the shocking events.
It's been called Kenya's 9/11 and a brutal coming of age for a country that doesn't fully understand the war it is fighting across its border. The raid on the Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi has gripped this nation of 44 million people and ushered in a period of anger and mourning. A dozen or so Islamists linked to the Somali rebel group al-Shabab killed scores of shoppers and violently repelled Kenyan forces for 4 days. First and foremost, this was a human tragedy. Survivors describe carnage and confusion as gunmen lobbed grenades and sprayed bullets at the lunchtime crowds. Mothers holding babies begged for mercy. Shoppers scattered and hid themselves in toilets and store cupboards. The unlucky ones were shot through the head, execution style. Bernard Mulwa, a Kenyan public relations consultant, told me how he made eye contact with the attacker who, only seconds later, shot him in the leg. "I've never seen a face so cold," he told me. "You couldn't place an emotion on him." The gunman said Muslim hostages were allowed to walk free. They quizzed people about their faith and demanded proof of piety by reading aloud an Arabic text. Fiona Herbert was hiding inside an unlit broom cupboard with her 9-month-old baby and a handful of scared people. They quietly tapped messages to loved ones on mobile phones. Some tried to memorize passages from the Quran in case they were questioned by gunmen. But the 34-year-old from South London did not try to feign a new faith during her 5-hour ordeal. "I'm ginger-haired and my baby's ginger too. There's no way I'm going to pass for a Muslim," she told me. Within hours, Kenyan police were reinforced with soldiers and a battle to retake the 4-story mall began. All the time, officials said they were winning. But the explosions, gunfire and black smoke billowing from the mall told a different story. This was a fierce battle against an enemy that was cunning, deadly, and had been planning its spectacle of terror for many months. Reports suggested they had rented a shop in the mall and used it to store belt-loaded machine guns and other heavy weaponry. The raid was a better planned and more audacious strike than anything Kenya had witnessed since it invaded Somalia at the end of 2011. Back then, Nairobi joined an African Union force that was pushing al-Shabab out of cities and bolstering a UN-backed government in the capital, Mogadishu. Al-Shabab retaliated with a string of kidnappings and bomb and gun attacks in Nairobi and in Kenya's northeast. But the group's original threat, to topple the skyscrapers of Nairobi, does not seem to have been followed through until the Westgate siege. And this could be the real game changer for the region. The shopping centre carnage may be a sign that al-Shabab is changing tactics. Ahmed Abdi al-Mohammed emerged as the group's new leader after an internal power struggle in June. Since then, al-Shabab has unleashed several big guerrilla strikes in southern Somalia. Some analysts describe a move to the asymmetric warfare favoured by al-Shabab's parent organisation, al-Qaeda. Others say it is a last-ditch attempt to remain relevant in the face of military setbacks and dwindling support. Over the coming weeks, Kenya will have to decide which of these two versions is true, and how to tackle the al-Shabab threat. For World Report, this is James Reinl in Kenya.
A proliferation of self-appointed citizen whistleblowers, watchdogs and commentators on social media in China has been the byproduct of a country with increasing wealth and access to technology.
The incessant incendiary gunfire that echoed through an upscale Nairobi shopping mall Saturday has put a new and gruesome focus on the brutal al-Shabab, the militant Somali Islamist group that even al-Qaeda reportedly considers to be too violent. It was a calculated assault played in bravado on Twitter and in cold blood among the shops and cafes of the Westgate Mall. This morning we'll hear from a survivor of the ordeal and from a man tracking al-Shabab who calls this an act of desperation. Also today,
he turned to the driver and said, you can tell the foreigner, we would never kill you. We might kidnap you and sell you, but we would never kill you. And then he laughed, and the driver laughed, and I tried to laugh.
He was a war correspondent who wanted to know more about the people our troops were fighting in Afghanistan. So Graham Smith went to great lengths and into great danger to start interviewing and talking to the Taliban. From elaborate disguises to pass for a local in Kandahar city to persistent and patient attempts to go deeper, he exposed their flaws and their philosophies. And in the process, he also exposed where our own military and government leaders have failed in their bid to defeat the Taliban. Now in a new book, he ties it all together. Graham Smith joins me in half an hour. We're also exploring the artistic side of cold, hard cash as our project Money follows the work of a sculptor and photographer who realized she could create art inside a person's mind by handing them unexpected gifts of money. We'll meet her in a little over an hour, but we begin with the attack in Nairobi. I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. This is The Current.
Where's the mother? No. She's injured behind her.
Well, confusion and chaos reigned as terrified shoppers fled Nairobi's Westgate Mall Saturday after gunmen stormed the shopping centre just after about 12 noon local time. Al-Shabab, an al-Qaeda-affiliated militant group based in Somalia, quickly took to Twitter to claim responsibility for the gruesome and deadly attack. The death toll rose throughout the weekend, and among the dead are at least 2 Canadians. 29-year-old Anne-Marie Delage, a diplomat who had been posted to the Canadian Embassy in Nairobi. Family members of a second Canadian victim, Vancouver businessman Naguib Damji, say he suffered a heart attack and died during that attack. And as the death toll mounted and survivors fled the mall, police and military entered, engaging in a fierce gun battle that has turned into a protracted siege. Kenyan officials yesterday said there were 10 to 15 gunmen in the building and dozens of mall goers still unaccounted for. The president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, lost his nephew in the attack.
I want every bereaved family to know that I, and indeed all of us, mourn very deeply with them. No one should lose their life so needlessly, so senselessly, and no family should have to receive news that their loved ones have been killed by a criminal bunch of cowards.
Well, we'll hear from one of the survivors in that attack in just a moment. But first, we're joined by freelance correspondent James Reinl, who has been following events closely as they unfold. And he's in Nairobi. Hello.
Hello there, Maria.
What can you tell us about what's been happening in the last couple of hours?
What we've been hearing very, very recently is loud crackles of gunfire, large explosions, and what we're looking at now is plumes of smoke coming out of the back of the building. That's the Westgate shopping mall, a large 4-story building with about 80 stores inside, where we understand the terrorists, the al-Shabab Islamist militants, are holed up in a part of the building with a number of hostages. We think there are between 10 and 15 of the hostage takers and an unknown number of civilians, shoppers inside. What we think is happening and what the Kenyan security services have told us is that an operation is ongoing. They're trying to retake the shopping mall and they're trying to take out the terrorists inside. It's been going on, what was called a final assault has been going on for a number of hours now.
Now, you make the point that the hostage takers have some hostages. Were any hostages released in the last several hours?
Yeah, what we do know is some information from the Kenyan Disaster Operations Centre. They've been tweeting information out, limited amounts of information, because they're not going into too many details with the public or the media about what exactly is happening inside, the nature of the security operation. But they're saying that over the night they managed to release a number of the hostages. We don't know how many. We don't know how many were inside before. But they do say, quote, that there are very few remaining. We are also closing in on the attackers. And the stuff that we've seen since, the smoke, the explosions, the gunfire that I've told you about, is obviously connected to this operation that's ongoing.
And you're saying about 10 to 15 attackers. Any word at all if any of those have been killed or captured?
There have been reports that are unconfirmed that some were killed in gunfights, exchanges overnight. This has been an ongoing operation. The Kenyan security forces, almost ever since the mall was taken, have been engaging in gunfire against the hostage takers. As we understand, pushing them back into a small area of the shopping mall, which some have speculated is a bathroom on the ground floor or adjoining the large Nakamat supermarket. That seems to be where the activity is concentrated. But of course, exactly what is going on inside this building isn't known to the outside world, because the Kenyan authorities, the commandos who are in charge of the operation, are not revealing too many details, and they're actually trying to create a kind of wall around what's happening, asking members of the media not to get too involved, not to try and communicate with any of the hostages inside, not to try and communicate with any of the terrorists inside.
This mall is huge, isn't it?
It's possibly the biggest shopping mall in Nairobi. As I say before, it's got 80 stores inside. It's got a large cinema with 6 or 7 screens. It's over 4 floors. It's got restaurants. It's got a casino. It's got shops. It's pretty big. And I think from a security perspective, that makes it a particularly big challenge for the Kenyan security forces to retake the building. It obviously took them a number of hours to get to where they are now. And last night, for example, Kenyan officials were quoted as saying that this will end tonight. Now, obviously, it hasn't ended tonight. Obviously, they're doing the best to make it end. But this is a closely fought battle against who are a group that are clearly hardened and willing to kill, and most likely willing to lose their own lives.
It's so incredibly frightening, huh?
Yes, no, absolutely terrifying. The stories that we're getting from the witnesses inside, people, lying down next to people who've been shot in the stomach, getting some, paper napkins from a cafe and trying to, plug the wound as you're watching people losing blood. I mean, these are absolutely horrific, unimaginable scenes that you would hope everybody would be spared from. But here in Nairobi, the al-Shabab Islamist group seems to have brought terror upon the Kenyan capital. And this is something that the city and the security forces are having to cope with. And
the Kenyan security forces are obviously in there. They're trying to do this. Why has this taken so long for them to find out where these hostages are and to deal with this?
Well, to answer that, I can only go into the realm of speculation, because all we can see is large plumes of smoke coming from the outside of a 4-story building several hundred meters away. Why is it taking so long? I guess because it's hard to get these guys, isn't it? There have been reports that they were that they took themselves into an area behind bulletproof glass, a protected area. That may suggest that it was a bank, for example, or some secure part of the shopping mall. That's been unconfirmed. Another report is that they're holed up inside a toilet or a bathroom, where I guess access is a problem. So I guess it's because there's a group of guys with guns who are willing to die and willing to kill people, who are able to fight off any raid. And the Kenyan security forces are going to be very concerned about any more civilians dying. So that's something they want to avoid at all costs.
And just the labyrinth that is the mall as well must be hindering their progress.
Yeah, it's a big building. There's lots of rooms. There's lots of off rooms. Yeah. Obviously, from a security point of view, a very difficult building to bring back under the control of the security forces.
Well, James, thanks for giving us a picture of what's going on there.
Thanks so much.
James Reinl, a freelance correspondent. We reached him in Nairobi. Now, Ariane Vestra is a freelance reporter who just happened to be at the Westgate Mall when al-Shabab entered and began shooting. Ariane Vestra joins us from Nairobi as well. Hello.
Hello.
Tell us where you were when the shooting began.
I was having a coffee, working a bit, and I could hear a small explosion. And then very soon after that short explosion, which must have been a grenade or something, I realized now I heard a gunshot. And less than a second after that, a non-stop automatic firing of bullets started, and it sounded like the art cafe terrace was being attacked. At the same moment, I saw people from outside. There's a terrace in front of the art cafe, running inside. They came screaming. It was a kind of chaotic. Tables were falling, glass was breaking. People inside started moving out to the inner court of the shopping mall, and some people decided to stay. Among them, I was one of them, let's put it like that, because I could hear the fire moving. They were not coming inside the art cafe, but I could hear the gunfire moving towards the main entrance. So I thought if I walk out in the open, I will be a walking target. So I decided to drop myself on the ground and hide together with a few other people. Then the fire calmed down a bit. Soon after that, the fire became more intense again. And that's when I realized I had to flee, because the fire was really moving towards the art cafe. And we really had to start moving. So that's when we crawled basically to the terrace, where at that time there was no shooting going on. And we stayed low, and we moved on the terrace. And then I got out safely, found a cover, and behind my back the shooting was getting more intense. So it really sounded like they were inside.
What did you see anyone killed in this cafe that you were in?
Yes. When I left the cafe, some people decided to stay, but I had a feeling I had to flee because the gunfire was moving towards Art Cafe at that very moment. I don't know if it's an intuition or I don't know what it was, but I just did what I had to do to stay alive, together with other people. We kind of agreed we should move.
And did you see the people with the guns?
No, I didn't see anybody. I could hear them. It was a feeling they were approaching, but it's not something you do when you look over your shoulder. I left everything behind, my laptop, my hard drive, and things. I was working. Well, I was having coffee and working a bit there.
And when all of this happened, what were people screaming? Were they helping each other? What was unfolding right around you?
What I hear from stories, well, people got together. We were kind of quickly discuss, yes, we have to go. When people thought it would say they could walk up, all of us said no, stay down. And so people were really watching out for each other, yes, for sure. And I could hear screaming in the outside. Yeah, there was a lot of screaming. Some people were crying. Some people were holding each other. Just, different reactions. Some people just stayed calm, quiet.
When you got out, you could see then the other people coming out, or you could see the injured coming out. Give us an idea of what you saw as this continued.
I think I was among a few of the first people to come out, and I saw my first four casualties. I saw with my own eyes, with flesh wounds and a lot of blood, but not dying, but a lot of blood loss, so to see. That was my first tweet about the casualties. That's what I saw. There were no ambulance at first, so there were private vehicles. People were being put in private vehicles, even in supermarket trolleys. There was a kind of panic, chaos. Yeah, not a kind of, it was panic and chaos, of course, yes.
Okay, Ariane, we have to leave it there. Thank you for speaking with me.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Ariane Vestra, a freelance reporter who was at the Westgate Mall when the shooting began. Well, attacks by Somalia's al-Shabab are nothing new, but this one is widely viewed as the most brazen and sophisticated to date, targeting an upscale area of Nairobi. For more on this attack and what it tells us, I'm joined by Ken Menkhaus. He's a professor of political science at Davidson College in North Carolina. He tracks al-Shabab as part of his work specializing in the politics of the Horn of Africa, which includes Somalia. And Ken Menkhaus is in Chennai, India today. Hello.
How are you?
What was your reaction when you first heard about this attack?
Oh, my heart dropped. This was a scenario that many of us had worried about for a long time, the possibility that the jihadi group in Somalia, Shabab, would take the war to Kenya by going after a major soft target like a shopping mall. For years it hadn't happened, and we thought we had pretty good ideas why Shabab was reluctant to do this. Once I heard the news, I knew that this was going to be a game changer, and knowing that mall and knowing how crowded it is on a Saturday morning, I suspected there'd be a lot of casualties.
So, but you're saying you've been almost worried that they would do this kind of thing.
The fear for a long time was this. Kenya had been supporting the war on terror against Shabab in Somalia for years. Later, about 2 years ago, it actually militarily intervened in southern Somalia against Shabab. Shabab has long had a network inside Kenya, a logistical support base. It has recruited inside Kenya. Its operatives come and go. So we always knew that if it wanted to get up to mischief in Kenya, it could. And Kenya, because of its economic success, has a lot of soft targets that are virtually impossible to protect against this kind of attack.
And how different was this kind of attack from what you've seen al-Shabab do in the past?
Shabab has mainly kept its fight inside Somalia. It has had a couple of attacks. There was, of course, the World Cup bombing attack in Uganda a couple of years ago. But generally speaking, it's kept the war inside Somalia. There have been a number of attacks inside Kenya that have been attributed to Shabab, but they've been small scale for the most part. And some of them appear to be inspired by Shabab, not necessarily committed by Shabab. So this was a whole new level of violence.
And in watching this unfold and knowing the difficulty that security forces are having in actually finding them and getting them out of there, what are you thinking?
Well, my first concern, of course, and this is everyone else's concern, is for the hostages. This was a martyrdom operation, it looks. I can't imagine that any of the fighters who went in expected to live once taking a mall where they knew they would be trapped by security forces. And so, my hopes are that somehow most or all of the hostages can be freed unharmed.
And, this attack is being discussed as a sign of its resilience, that it's the beginning of a reemergence of al-Shabab. What do you think of that characterization?
Well, it is a resilient organization, but it's not a resurgence. This is, in fact, an act of desperation. I think the record is quite clear that though Shabab is still the strongest armed group in southern Somalia, and though it's capable of daily assassinations and bombings in Mogadishu, it is far weaker today than it was several years ago, and it's suffered very heavy losses just in the past year. It's had a bloody internecine fight within itself just this summer, and a lot of top leaders were killed or driven out of the movement. Most of its foreign fighters have been disaffected and left the movement, and it's got far less control over valuable territory in Somalia than it had in the past. And most importantly, it's got far fewer Somalis who support the group. So it's in a world of trouble. And I think that's precisely why it launched this very high-risk gamble. I think it's hoping that this will provoke a heavy-handed Kenyan response, possibly even vigilante justice by Kenyan citizens against Somalis in ways that will allow Shabab to frame the crisis as Somalis versus the foreigners. And if it can do that, then it stands a chance of serving as the protector of Somalis and Somali interests and might regain some Somali support. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope the group continues to slide into irrelevance, and I hope Somalis take the matter into their own hands and engage in a Somali version of a Sunni uprising against the extremists who remain in this movement.
Now, this movement is al-Qaeda affiliated. What does that really mean?
That doesn't mean as much as most people think. Shabab has been pushing very hard to advertise itself as an ally of, an affiliate of al-Qaeda. But if you look closely at al-Qaeda's statements and its internal correspondence that is now available on the public domain, what you can see is that for several years, Al-Qaeda has, in fact, been appalled at the gratuitous violence by Shabab that it sees as counterproductive. So relations are actually quite strained between Al-Qaeda and Shabab over these kinds of tactics. And this latest attack is hardly what Al-Qaeda wants in its playbook. I think this will only strain relations still further.
But Al-Qaeda is known for attacking civilians. Why does it see the al-Shabab as so rogue?
It's the civilians that they choose to target. And in fact, if you look recently, Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri has issued a guidance to Al-Qaeda fighters to try to avoid civilian casualties. They've become a little bit smarter. I think it's too late for them, but it's certainly the case that Al-Qaeda learned that uncontrolled violence against civilians in places like Iraq really damaged the brand name of Al-Qaeda and has made it reluctant to franchise with these groups outside of its direct control.
We've had stories in Canada of young men going to join al-Shabab. How much of their force is with foreigners versus those who were actually living in Somalia?
Most of their fighters are Somalis. There are some Somali diaspora who have come from places like Canada, the U.S., and elsewhere to join them. Those are relatively small in number, but they can be quite significant in the movement. And then there have been some non-Somali foreign fighters in the movement, but again, most of those have become disaffected and left. I think the big question that remains unanswered at this time is who were the actual fighters, the terrorists who launched the attack against Westlands Mall. It'll be quite significant to Canada and the U.S. If any of their national citizens of Somali origin are among those terrorists.
Okay. Ken Minkhouse, thank you for your perspective on this today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Ken Minkhouse, professor of political science at Davidson College in North Carolina, tracking al-Shabab in his work. He was in Chennai, India. Now, coming up, Canadian troops fought in Afghanistan for more than a decade. They've had successes, but peace and stability eluded them. One of Canada's keenest observers on the chaos in Afghanistan is Graham Smith, former Globe and Mail correspondent. He's written a book where he ties it all together. We'll hear from him next. This is The Current.